Hello, everyone. So, today we're going to talk about some of the examples of principles of perceptual organization. So, to begin with, we have the principle of proximity. So, the term proximity means closeness. How close are the objects placed together? So, basically, when we look at the picture right in front of us, we will not perceive them as square pattern of dots, but rather we will look at them as group of dots which are coming together in the form of rows. Because as per the Gestalt laws, we always look at objects as a whole. We don't really look at them as discrete elements. We don't look at them as smaller parts. We always look it as in the form of a greater, bigger picture, in the form of an organized, complete body, complete object. So we will not look at them as smaller parts, as discrete parts. So rather, I would look at them as a group of dots which are coming together in the form of rows. Now, coming to the next one, which is the principle of similarity. Now, here, what is important to understand is that whenever we have objects that are very similar to one another in terms of especially their characteristics, where they have similar characteristics, we perceive them as a group. Now, when we look at the picture here, we will see them that these are tiny circles, So these are little tiny circles that have been placed horizontally, and but we would look at them as literally columns of circles. We are not looking at them as individual circles, but we would look at them as circles that have been placed in columns. So again, I'm trying to basically not get into the smaller parts of it, not try and get into the discrete elements of it, but I'm looking at is with probably in the form of a bigger picture, in the form of a whole, an organized body. So I would look at them as columns of circles, but I will not look at them circles separately or individually, right? So then, of course, when we talk about the principle of continuity, that's very important to understand because that's basically how we tend to perceive objects that are belonging together, and we also feel that they are going in a very continuous pattern. They are following a very continuous pattern without any kind of a breakage in between. So we perceive it as one basically. So if we look at the picture here in law of continuity, we will not break it into parts and feel that okay, there is a turn in the middle, but we would literally take it as one whirling string. That's a whirling string that's probably spiral in nature, but we will not consider it into parts, and that's how flow the information, but rather we would look at it as a whirling string literally. And so we are not trying to break it into parts. We do feel and we perceive that it is actually following a very continuous pattern. That is what is there in the law of continuity. When we talk about the principle of smallness, very clearly, as per this principle, the smaller areas are going to highlight and they are going to stand out as figures, against the larger area, and the larger area will be perceived as the background because we have talked about the figure ground segregation also. So we know that what is the difference between a figure and what is literally a background. So here the smaller part is going to stand out, it's going to get highlighted more, and that smaller areas are always perceived as figures, against the larger background. When we talk about the principle of symmetry, this principle very clearly states that we are actually seeing these symmetrical areas as figures against the asymmetrical background. Again, symmetrical areas are the ones which have a very defined contour line, which are very definite in shape. They probably have a very, very well defined outline. So that's what is going to stand out as figures. And of course, a symmetrical area would be perceived as a background. When we talk about the principle of surroundedness, very interestingly, it states that the area that's going to be surrounded, the area that's going to be surrounded by the others will be perceived as figures. So basically, we are tend to look at probably something that's going to stand out and we're going to perceive that as figure, but sometimes the background that's filling it also has a meaning, but we are not able to understand or probably interpret or read that. Probably a person who's more of a field independent person, would be able to interpret it, who can think out of the box, will be able to interpret even the background here, but that is not really taken into attention or is not considered, because talking about the area that is surrounded by the others is actually standing out, it's getting more highlighted, and that is what is being perceived literally as the figure here, and the background is not taken notice of in any which way. So that actually stands against of course, the main figure, and that is the background. All right, so of course, then we have the next one, which is the principle of closure, and we can very clearly see it even over here, that it's actually a rhombus, but we perceive it as a rhombus because there's a tendency in all of us that we tend to fill in the gaps, and we would perceive those objects as a whole, again I'm saying, and we would not look at them as discrete elements or in the form of smaller parts, but when we look at them at once, it comes into our mind that okay, this is but a rhombus, this is but a circle, this is but a square, this is but a rectangle, even if there could be breakages in between, but essentially we know that yes, it is a rhombus. So again, using the Gestalt law, that how we look at it as a complete body, as a whole, as an organized whole, you know, and not in the form of discrete elements or in the form of smaller parts. Then, of course, just in case of your knowledge, we also have, the law of common region, and we do have the law of good figure. Then, of course, law of common region says very clearly that when objects are located within the same closed region, then we actually perceive them as being grouped together. That's what law of common region says. And the law of good figure essentially means that the objects will always be viewed, or they'll always be seen in the environment, in a way that's going to make them very, very simple, as simple as possible. Means more organized, more definite, more comprehensible, So this was all about the examples of just all laws. Essentially, this was the part two of our principles of perceptual organization. So thank you so much.